Well, I think other industries can learn from games our openness and willingness to solve problems, not from a hierarchical standpoint, but from a we're all in this together type of standpoint. One of the best parts about making games is the fact that everyone brings their capabilities to the table, our functions, our know how, our hard skills, and we just jam. This concept of jamming, this concept of exploring of what can happen, using our imagination and using this idea that everything is achievable as long as we can sort out how to align things is a fantastic type of way of doing things. I think ultimately in the day, if the C-suite and the executives get involved with the functional managers, or in some cases on the ground technicians, you're going to find yourself in a better position to come up with really innovative ideas that spur the boundaries of what is possible, and more importantly, even engender entrepreneurship and creativity within every aspect of the organization. Well, we don't nudge trust. We either we are trustworthy or we're not trustworthy. I think the key thing here is basically a radical candor that comes from the top executives and the CEO who effectively understands that being honest and open and being truthful is the best way to get people to come in and put their 100% into the game of work. I think ultimately what it comes down to is making sure that people know that what is happening is clearly understandable as to why. Now, obviously, different things happen within the organization. Some things you just cannot get into, but ultimately, if you sit down as an executive and you sit down and realize that everyone is going through the same thing right now, that gives you the anchor point to start having very truthful conversations. And even don't be afraid to show some emotion. In fact, I would probably tell you to show emotion because ultimately, in the end of the day, that is the one thing we all have that makes us human. So ultimately, in the end of the day, displaying that and being vulnerable and willing to talk about circumstances is only going to be better. And at the end, the organization will love you for it because that shows that you too are seeing what's happening. Let's talk about culture first. I think culture basically comes down to the understanding of what makes us unique and what is it that we do when we're not watching. When the CEO is not watching, how does the company behave? And I think ultimately culture comes down through the actions that we do. So obviously, as we start to engender this type of open and transparent environment, a creative environment, an environment in which we're trying to solve problems together, we then find ourselves in circumstances where we leverage technology to do very simple things like, cross networking between departments, or games night, boards night, basically where we get pizza for everyone delivered and then we eat together while on Zoom just talking about whatever. These small things that basically may not seem like much, but ultimately bring respite for people who are otherwise locked up in their house is extremely important. And I think ultimately in the end, if you get the executives to come down and participate, that is going to create things even better. Now, in terms of diversity, here is the key thing. I mean, straight off the bat, to support diversity initiatives in the organization, we need to basically find those initiatives we want to support. And really, there are a tremendous amount of organizations out there, nonprofits, that are linking diverse candidates to organizations. And more importantly, you could even set one up yourself where you turn to your internal organization and ask people, say like, look, we're very much trying to bring people up within the organization. Who do we know and what do we have available, and see about bringing those people together to some form of remote mentorship. I know one of the things that I end up doing is I do a lot of mentorship with people outside of my organization and in my community, because ultimately in the end, it helps me learn more and it helps me understand where things are going. I think this is an area where the executives very much need to be involved, and this isn't something that you phone in. So ultimately in the end, your chief executive and your COO, this is really one of those things where you guys and you gals get to lead, because ultimately in the end, you have to set the example. So here's the thing about bureaucracy. It makes sense when everything is predictable. When it's not, that's a place where you start to realize, well, we just do this because we do it rather than actually having a point. I think the first thing here is to understand that with this new situation and this new distributed workforce that we have, we give people more latitude to effectively do the things they want to do in order to accomplish the overall organization goals. So at that point in time, we kind of let the reins go a little bit. But what we look for is effectively setting up programs and communication that tell people like, look, we're going to spend a couple hours trying to solve problems with blue sky let's say, ideas, and we let them go, and we see what the results are, and we're going to embrace the fact that probably 90% are going to fail, but that's okay, because we want to learn from those failures. We want to take that information internally, identify what went wrong, what went right, and then reinstitute that back into our next approach, and then try again. There is this concept of trial and failure and basically learning that has to be brought back into the organization so people understand that the entrepreneurial aspect of our business is here, and of course the communications to everyone within the organization, making sure that the actual management, the teams, that they themselves understand that it's okay to do this is key. So the first starting point for me would be, the C-suite and the executives sitting down and leading one of these programs, and effectively maybe even putting one together that stretches across all different aspects of the organization. Of course, it needs to make sense. It's not a kumbaya session, but we need to make sure that we're all connected together. I'm a bit of a wonk. I love policy. I love economics, and political policy, I should say. And I love economics as well as just technology in general. So I spend my time reading a lot, but then ultimately at the same time, I embrace my creative aspects, making videos, and doing photography and journaling. So I think that ultimately what I look at now, especially given the fact that we're all locked up, that there's really a return to the humanities, the idea of the whole person, the idea that it's important for us to basically enshrine every aspect of our lives with this learning and willingness to celebrate effectively the things that we have, and then acknowledge the things that we don't, and then go after them. So I think ultimately, in the end of the day, working with nonprofit boards, exploring your artistic backgrounds, reading, taking the time to intentionally read, as well as to observe, this is very important. So this is what I spend a lot of my times on. My weekends are usually that, when I'm not just running around with the kids and just trying to, keep a house down as we basically do what we got to do.